This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. At the recently completed Icarus Fringe and Film Festival, I was joined on stage on the first day by Michael Tracey and Max Blumenthal to discuss whether the American empire is at an end. It was, not surprisingly, contentious, extremely informative, and a bit wild. This is my interview with Michael Tracey and Max Blumenthal.
Good. Okay. Welcome to the second annual Icarus Fest. I am Thad Russell. All right, I'll just say it. So there was a dissident conference recently in New York City. I think it was in Brooklyn, and I think it featured as its main speaker someone who works with the U.S. State Department, and other people there work for places like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I feel like this just wasn't very dissident. So what we're doing here is having only people who are certainly don't work for the government or any government and are anti-establishment. What does that mean? To me, it just simply means you don't work for the cultural institutions that control our culture. You don't work for major media outlets that are legacy outlets. You don't work in academia necessarily, and you don't certainly work for the State Department. So today, we have people who speak against the mainstream, against the consensus, on both cultural issues and certainly political issues. And we're beginning with, of course, these two gentlemen here, who I am a huge fan of, who get in a lot of trouble as Icaruses in their own right, flying too close to the sun. So we have Max Blumenthal here at the Gray Zone. I'm pretty sure he doesn't work for a government, but we're going to ask him about that. Rumors afoot about this. And then Michael Tracey, who works for himself. Best way to be. And Michael recently has been calling into question even dissidents themselves, which I love. There's never a time to stop critiquing what's going on around you, even though it can be occasionally a pain in the ass. But Michael is invaluable, I think, as a gadfly for all of us. So today, we're going to talk about a fairly large question. Looks to me like the American empire might be on the way out, but I'm not sure. And so I want to ask these guys, who I think know better than anyone, what to expect in the coming days and years. So let's begin. Do you guys think we are approaching or in the end of the American empire? Let me just sort of set the stage a little bit as I see the world recently that might lead me to ask this question. So Russia has won the war in Ukraine. I think that's pretty much a given at this point. And Israel, the other major proxy of the American empire, is facing a war at this point on 5 fronts, 6 fronts, I can't keep track anymore. And of course, the fate of the Jewish state in Israel as an ethno-state, I think, is very, very much in question for the first time in its existence. And of course, if you are a leader of the American empire, you need that state. So 2 of its major proxies are in major existential trouble. Does this mean we are now at the end of the American empire? I'm curious about Max's take. Is this something we should look forward to, or is it something we should fear, or is it not happening at all?
I was hoping Michael would go first. You always ask the really granular questions. I was watching Vladimir Putin speak at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum for the international press. And it was a press conference you won't see Joe Biden or Rishi Sunak do, where he's seated in a casual fashion at a long table with members of the press who are just face to face with him, asking questions, follow-up questions. And he was asked about what he thought about reports that the Biden administration was going to be authorizing strikes with ATACMS missiles into Russian territory. And Putin pointed out correctly that previously the attacks that the Ukrainian military had been waging into the Donbass and somewhat into the Russian territory, like Belgorod, were from HIMARS missiles. And you only need a team on the ground to operate those. But to actually use the ATACMS system, which is made by Lockheed Martin, you need satellite assistance, you need people who have the NSA mapping, and only the United States can operate that system. And essentially what they do is they just have a Ukrainian guy who pushes a button and they're like, Igor, push the button. Yeah, da, and he just pushes it. But it's not, what he's saying is basically the US is attacking us now. And they're just using like a Ukrainian front man. And what he is going to do to retaliate is he is going to be arming Russia's allies against US proxies and US allies with longer range and more sophisticated weaponry going forward. Russia is sending 2 naval warships to dock in Havana, Cuba. They are going to be giving longer range missiles to Venezuela. This is going to happen in the Americas, on the continent of South America. I mean, of course, they're not sending nuclear. They've said we're not sending nuclear missiles to Cuba. Why are they doing this? Because they can. Because the U.S. has been weakened so much. It cannot deter this any longer, and the U.S. has provoked this. And Russia has also reached a stage after the collapse of the Soviet Union where it's technologically and industrially advanced enough that it can actually escalate. We're also seeing non-state actors do this with the most powerful US-armed military in the Middle East. Hezbollah has been able to match Israel on a one-to-one basis with soldier casualties. It has set the north of Israel on fire. Top Israeli generals who are advising the war cabinet have said we don't actually have the manpower to dislodge Hezbollah. They're not just south of the Litani River. They're all throughout Lebanon now. We don't have what it takes. And Israel is struggling with its incursion into Rafah. It's losing a lot of soldiers. It's even lost soldiers in Jabalia in the north. This is against a much weaker non-state actor. We haven't even brought China into the equation. Now, if these wars actually begin, like a real confrontation between the United States and a nuclear-armed power like Russia, the United States will fall into an existential crisis from which liberal democracy will never recover. I don't know if it's going to come to that. I don't think it will come to that. But what could take place is, with the rise of BRICS and a new sort of what's referred to as a multipolar world order, the U.S. domination of the international financial order will weaken, and that too will cause grave and probably irreparable damage to the American way of life as we know it. And people here will suffer. As a result, we're basically living through a giant illusion where the U.S. can infinitely print money, which is backed by the petrodollar, which is also backed by U.S. military bases around the world threatening anyone who wants to get out of that system. And once that falls apart, things are not going to be looking so good right now. And so in closing, just from where I started, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum was also, I was invited. I wasn't offered anything. They just said, if you get here, we'll let you in. Scott Ritter was invited. We talked about him last year. Would love to have you invite him, but he should just get his own panel. But he was pulled off a plane by State Department agents. His passport was seized, and he was not allowed to go. And we'll talk more about the targeting of people who have dissenting opinions. But this is, we're witnessing the facade of liberal democracy lifting and peeling back in a more accelerated fashion than I would have believed domestically, and it relates to the dawn of a new world order in which the United States is no longer the dominant power. I guess if that means the end of U.S. empire, then that would answer your question, but I think the U.S. will remain a military superpower for the rest of our lives.
Tremendous answer. I learned a lot from that, and I think you highlighted what are important nodes of conflict that might signal the end or at least a transition within the American empire to something different. But there's much more, too. There are crises in multiple parts of the world that you haven't even mentioned that the U.S. is facing. I'm really curious what Michael Tracey thinks, because Michael Tracey always thinks differently.
Sadly. So, first off, I think it's basically undeniable that there is a gradual diminution in the primacy of the American empire. I mean, just compare the singular power of the United States in 2024 versus, I don't know, 1993. And it's hard to argue that there has been a significant diminution, but where people, I think, get a little ahead of themselves is when they posit grandiosely that means we're on the precipice of this major collapse of the American empire. If that were to happen, it would more than likely be a very gradual, almost barely perceptible process. Yeah, are there going to be accelerations at times? No doubt. Obviously, and everybody can see the economic data in China, which even though it had a bit of a rut recently, is becoming at least a roughly equivalent economic and military power to the U.S., and if it is allied with Russia, then that enhances its status further. Just wanted to make a quick point on something that Max mentioned, because obviously this is a huge escalation that we just saw formalized within the past week or so, which is that after weeks of signaling and lobbying and telegraphing, the U.S. has authorized the Ukrainian armed forces to use U.S. munitions to strike inside Russia. Now, that had already been going on de facto for some time, and Biden, before this past week, had claimed that that was never going to happen because that would be just too intolerable of an escalation. It could even lead to World War III. But starting around May of last year, 2023, there were instances when these Ukrainian units were using U.S. weaponry, like armored vehicles and such, to launch these initial cross-border raids into Russia that was supposed to precede its big, triumphant counteroffensive. So that's already been going on. The difference now is that there's been a concerted lobbying push to actually have Biden himself articulate a change in policy. And naturally, Tony Blinken is the one who was leading the charge on that. So when people kind of talk about, oh, Biden's so degraded and cognitively unfit, maybe so, but does it matter all that much if Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken are the ones running policy anyway? I mean, Biden could just sit there and sign executive orders or, formally authorize things. It doesn't matter that much in terms of the actual administration of the executive branch. And by the way, we talk about these like phony dissidents or whether dissidents themselves ought to be scrutinized. Max mentioned, Putin did accurately observe that in order for these Ukrainian units to launch rockets across the border into Russia, they have to get basically instant pre-approval by the U.S. military in either Poland or in Germany, which is where this is run out of, to some extent Romania, actually. And do you know who runs the communication systems that enable that satellite technology that facilitates these attacks? Elon Musk. It's Starlink. Elon Musk has brokered a secret contract with the Pentagon to hand over Starlink capabilities to the Pentagon. Now, he's somebody else who, because he'll say "wow" in response to like somebody on X, complaining about immigration or something, that means he's this big, bold, dissident, heterodox thinker. Okay, I mean, I guess on balance, I prefer him to be running the platform than somebody else who has all these tattletale bureaucrats running things. But I mean, it's kind of like two sides of the same coin in a way. I mean, that's something to bear in mind. I do think that there are signs of an erosion in the American prestige. Obviously, I think a lot of that has to do with actually Donald Trump. So for Donald Trump to have been convicted of a crime, 34 felonies, however you want to put it, regardless of the merits, that does actually, in a way, puncture some of the facade of this kind of unimpeachable American hegemonic project where presidents were, basically just presumptively immune from such prosecutions. Now we can get into the details if people want about like the conduct and the charges, and I agree that there was this attempt clearly to make a bespoke prosecutorial theory that was specifically targeted against Trump. But nonetheless, if you have the 3-time Republican nominee who's now technically a convicted felon, yeah, that does kind of remove some of the luster from the American project. So I'll just wrap up with a point that I've been harping on a lot lately because it just drives me utterly insane, and maybe I'm crazy. But this idea that people want to pin their dissident hopes on Donald Trump is actually worryingly popular. I don't know, maybe we could survey the crowd here or attendees or whoever. I think even Thad has toyed with this idea at times, and we've thought about it. But, I mean, what more does this guy have to do to dissuade you? I mean, he literally orchestrated. I just published a piece today based on an interview that I did with the senator from North Dakota, Kevin Cramer, Republican, who coordinated and collaborated with Trump. I have him on the record. Go read it. In between Trump's court proceedings in New York about how he and Lindsey Graham could see to it that the big national security supplemental bill that was passed in April and Biden signed would get through because Trump has this awesome power over the House Republican caucus in particular. So he basically subdued any meaningful opposition by coming out in favor of this. And it's going to subsidize another probably 2 years or so of consistently escalating warfare in Ukraine. So my conclusion was that every missile that's now flying over the border, as Max mentioned, really should be emblazoned with the gold-lettered signature of Donald J. Trump. And now you could put the presidential seal of Biden on as well, but the point is there's lots of continuity and commonality there that people like to lose sight of because they want to believe because it's really exciting that Trump is this renegade, dissident, Icarus or something. To wrap up, on the point of the empire in decline, yeah, I think that's been the case probably since the early 90s, but people shouldn't get their hopes up too much about it, coming in this sudden, flash bang, and then there's flowers and roses dropping from the sky or something. BRICS, Anya, who's here, Max's wife, we were at the BRICS summit. I wasn't that impressed by it. What is it? It's just like a panel discussion that world leaders show up and hobnob at. It's not like some major threatening military alliance that's going to take American hegemony down a peg. They claimed that they were going to announce this amazing new alternate currency and then just forgot about it. So I think people should reconcile themselves with the perpetuation of American primacy for the foreseeable future rather than getting their hopes up for something dramatic to happen relatively soon, notwithstanding noteworthy, obviously, developments in Israel, Ukraine, and elsewhere.
Okay. I have said since he was elected that Trump is no savior. He's not an anti-imperialist. He is not opposed to the existence of the American empire, although I would say he's opposed to its existence in its current form. What he did, though, I think might have been a sea change in that he's the first president, really the first major politician in American history, to call into question regime change wars, interventions that are optional, like the Iraq War, permanent occupations, right? That's the hallmark of imperialism. He's opposed to that, at least has been rhetorically.
False.
And he called into question...
Just demonstrably false. But
which one, occupations?
Well, Afghanistan, did you see what Trump said just this week? He was on Fox for one of his regular ass-kissing interviews, and he said, we were never actually going to withdraw from Afghanistan under me and Mike Pompeo, another warrior against the deep state, apparently. Because what Trump said was we were going to defy the Doha Agreement with the Taliban in 2020, and we were going to keep 4,000 troops permanently at Bagram Air Base. So what are you talking about?
So Donald Trump does not have message discipline. This is true. What I have been saying, though, is that he's the first president to ever call these things into question. I was about to say NATO was the first thing he called into question, which is why Russiagate happened, which is why Donald Trump hysteria happened, I think. The opposition to him began with the CIA, began with the leaders of the empire. So I think he's been useful in that way, and also I think maybe most importantly, and this is something I'd like to talk about with you guys, and you're very well aware of this because you work with right-wingers, right? He made it possible for right-wingers to feel okay to oppose the American empire. It's okay for many of them now to say, we don't need bases around the world. We don't need to support NATO. Maybe we don't need to be in NATO. And you see this across the right wing for the first time in my whole lifetime. And with Gaza, I think you see it accelerating, believe it or not. I know plenty of right-wingers are grotesque about this, but there are many, many who previously were sort of knuckle draggers, cave people, John McCain types, wanted to blow up Arabs, and now they see things very differently because things look very differently thanks to social media and thanks to the cameras on the ground in Gaza, right? They actually see the results of what all this is about. They actually see the results of the American empire, they see the results of Zionism, and they don't like it, and they want out. That, again, I think was enabled in large part by Donald Trump, as stupid and as imperfect as he is, rhetorically calling into question all these things, not the support for Israel, of course, but the support for the empire. And I actually think, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump starts to say things differently about U.S. support for Israel too, but we'll see. But nonetheless, again, he's already opened the way.
Wish casting.
He's already opened the way for many people on the right who previously were John McCain's, right, to actually call into question this whole project now. So that's what I'm going to say about that. But I wanted to ask, and you can attack me if you want, but what I wanted to ask you now is something a little different, which is about things outside the United States, right? Because it's not, the empire's not going to fall on its own. It needs resistance, doesn't it, for it to fall, or go away, or fade, or transform, whatever is going to happen to it. So I want to talk to, I think, maybe the leading expert in the world right here on the global, I think it's true, global resistance to that empire. It seems vast, far-flung, on damn near every continent now, led by armed resistance in many cases. I don't know exactly how strong it is, and I'd like to get Max's take on this, but I want to say this. Noam Chomsky actually said, I think he's about the only person who has said this, that the United States actually won the Vietnam War. Why? He says, because we killed 2 million of them. The United States killed 2 million people and thereby declared to the rest of the world, or announced to the rest of the world, if you want to come against us, this is what you'll face. Now, if you look at, as I said, Russia's won the war and Israel is losing its war, but at what cost, right? How many Russians have died, and we know how many Palestinians have died for this, and others, right? Other members of the resistance, broadly speaking, in Yemen, in Iraq, probably in Iran, and more to come, possibly in Iran. So is the United States actually winning or losing by killing so many people in the service of its empire? And how big is the resistance and how strong is it?
Well, it doesn't really matter how big it is in terms of man and woman power, because most people in Egypt hate the United States, but they have no power in their own society. They're bound by the Camp David, they're under the control of a military junta that's bound by the Camp David Agreement into a cold peace with Israel. So there's all these people that are living in a panopticon, which the United States is kind of quietly managing from afar. But let's look at Afghanistan. Pashto farmers, like the Viet Cong, at an enormous cost in human life, blood, and they didn't have any treasure, but a near destruction of their entire society. Ran the United States out, routed them, and the war could have actually been over before. And I got to disagree. Donald Trump was actually working with civilian elements in his administration to push for several ceasefires and a withdrawal, negotiating directly with the Taliban, and it was the Pentagon's military leadership that would consistently sabotage it by attacking Taliban forces during various ceasefire agreements.
But he said he was never going to withdraw. He said he was going to keep 4,000 troops at Bagram in perpetuity.
He may have said that.
He was going to violate the Doha Agreement.
But the Trump administration was adhering to it. They were also pushing for withdrawal of U.S. troops from northeastern Syria. He brought in your friend Doug McGregor, Colonel Douglas McGregor, at the end in the Pentagon.
Another piece of work.
To usher in these, what he tried to do was heroic. And I give Biden credit. What he did was heroic in withdrawing from Afghanistan, as bungled as it was going to always be. But just let's consider Afghanistan as a test case of resistance. The Taliban, what did they have? They have pretty much the same weapons Hamas had, but they had much more freedom to navigate more favorable terrain. It wasn't just urban warfare. In the past, they'd been given Toyota Technicals by Saudi Arabia on behalf of the U.S. So they didn't have much. And what the U.S. was able to do there, you think, oh, the U.S. is able to mobilize this ferocious army and just bring the pure force down on a society. No, the U.S. had a fake army, basically. The Afghan army was basically a ghost army. Other than some Uzbeks and people who were from ethnic groups that opposed the Pashto majority, they didn't really have anything. The U.S. troops were barely able to get out of the garrison at a certain point. And then the Afghan troops they were training, there was all these green-on-green attacks, killing Americans. They were basically reckless, unable to be controlled, were not effective. Many of them were actually working on behalf of the Taliban. So the U.S. military as a global expeditionary force is now vastly overrated. And it certainly is not like what we saw in Vietnam, where it was a conscripted army, largely of poor and working class men. Now it's basically a glorified mercenary army of people like the 3 American soldiers who died at, what was it, Tower, I forget what it's called now, Tower 12, well, it was technically in Jordan on the border of Syria. It's a secret base. None of us knew it existed. And 3 black American soldiers were killed in a drone attack by the Iraqi resistance forces. What were they doing there? They were doing construction work. They were basically construction workers who wanted to have make a better salary, have a pension. They didn't believe in what the U.S. was doing there. None of the troops in northeastern Syria know why they're there. They don't know why they're there. There's no real commitment to any of this. And just imagine what would happen if the U.S. got into a direct conflict with China over the South China Sea or Strait of Taiwan, where you just had this insane conference in Singapore where Lloyd Austin shows up with Zelensky, and Zelensky looking like G.I. Joe. He's not even wearing a suit. He looks like a kid he looks like what Tony Blinken's son dressed up as for Halloween. Blinken dressed his son up as Zelensky. And they're all trying to mobilize a coalition of small countries like Philippines and Japan against China to basically all die in a crazy war on behalf of the U.S., like Ukraine is currently doing against Russia. How's that going to go? Well, there have been various war game scenarios played out, funded by the Smith Richardson Foundation, which is a major funder of neocon activities in Washington. I think CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, had one of what a direct conflict between the U.S. and China would look like. So basically, the war game is being run by people who are very favorable to the U.S., who would possibly like to see the U.S. get into a conflict with China. And they found that China would take out an entire battle carrier group. An entire U.S. aircraft carrier would go down, and in the first moments of the war, 20,000 U.S. service members would be lost. That's sort of so I'm saying it's a very conservative estimate. Again, imagine the existential crisis that would produce. So I think the U.S. is kind of stymied here. We're in a new kind of Vietnam syndrome. You could call it Ukraine syndrome. You could call it Israel syndrome. You talked about Trump lifting the mask on the U.S. rules-based order and exposing to the world that the U.S. is not this shining city on the hill that is a model for democratic humanity. I actually think Biden has done more damage than Trump, because it's Biden and Blinken who put themselves forward as the good stewards of the rules-based order, whereas Trump is just supposed to be an authoritarian thug who likes to get pregnant and get butt-rammed by Putin, like as various murals that have appeared on New York showed. So Blinken, he's smooth. He's basically a Frenchman. We basically have a fucking Frenchman as the head of.
He grew up in Paris, didn't he?
He
like
grew up in
one of the
Paris.
most wealthy enclaves or something.
The guy who raised him, who was the fixer for Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, who was a Mossad agent, was Francois Mitterrand's consigliere to the Jewish community. Samuel Pissarre. He was a Frenchman. Okay, so this French guy is running the State Department. He plays, the blues and dresses his kid as Zelensky for
Rockin' in the free world.
He's really trying to put himself forward as the face, the smooth, soft-handed face and voice of the rules-based order. And he was rolling. I mean, he was going for a while. Things were looking good. Denouncing Putin for bombing schools, denouncing Putin for bombing, calling for an ICC warrant. The U.S. straight up finagled an ICC warrant for Vladimir Putin by funding the research through a Yale research lab, as me and Jeremy Lafredo, who's here, revealed at the Gray Zone. Then October 7th happens. Israel's bombing schools, or as the New York Times said, an ex-school. That was a New York Times headline, that Israel massacred over 30 people sheltering in an ex-school. They're bombing schools every day. They're carrying out an industrial-scale genocide that's being live-streamed, and Tony Blinken, his main role now is to extend the genocide, to call schools ex-schools, to declare that we don't know if U.S. weapons were used, when even CNN is finding the GBU 38s on the ground in a former refugee camp of burned, scorched tents where children were beheaded with U.S. weapons. That's Tony Blinken now, and so the whole world sees that the real steward of liberal democracy, the person who, maybe he's a Democrat, but he's really trying to convey what Reagan did during his administration and trying to liberate the world from authoritarianism, is a complete fraud. The emperor has no clothes, and beyond them is Trump. So I think the Biden administration, at a point when the U.S. military is stymied, and we're moving into a completely different era of warfare than the kind that we saw in Vietnam. I think what we're seeing between Russia and Ukraine is anomalous. The U.S. diplomacy has completely collapsed. U.S. soft power is gone, and it's happened. It was going to happen under a Democratic administration with Barack Obama as kind of the hidden hand.
So Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote this book called The Grand Chessboard in 1997, in which he says very clearly that the key to everything is Eurasia. We must control the Eurasian landmass in perpetuity, and we must block any rival from rising to power on that landmass. He wrote that in 1997. He is, of course, sort of became the Kissinger of the foreign policy establishment, kind of the main intellectual theorist. And that's really explains, I think, just about all of American foreign policy since then in Eurasia. But they're losing, and they're losing badly. And right now, I don't see any place for America to go. So China, right? Here's how people spend their time in Max's hometown. Not Max, but people who really live there. I've been listening to the think tanks, the foreign policy think tank podcasts. They all have a podcast. Council on Foreign Relations, CSIS, all right. And I kid you not, they've been saying repeatedly for months now that what they do on the weekends for fun is they invite all the interns from the think tanks and the junior staff and maybe some senior staff to come over, and they lay out maps on their kitchen tables and play war games with China all weekend long. Instead of Dungeons and Dragons, they plan for war with China. Now, the fantasies must be awesome among them. And the thing is, though, at the very same time, there's been report after report after report from high-level foreign policy, military analysts, ex-military people who are serious establishment types saying we simply cannot win any kind of conflict with China anywhere near China. They control that whole area, their whole coastline and hundreds of miles out into the sea. We can't get anywhere near them. They will blow us out of the water. So there's that. Then, maybe even more consequentially, Brzezinski's worst nightmare happened, right? Russia is not only on the rise and just won a war, or is in the process of winning a war with our main proxy, but it just entered into a very favorable alliance with China, very productive and favorable alliance with China. That's exactly what they have not wanted to happen, and it is happening. BRICS is almost sort of marginal compared to that, right? It's on the side. That is really the problem. And if that continues and becomes a real military alliance, which you could even say it is at this point, functionally, that's a massive problem. And I just simply don't see the U.S. cracking that with the military that it has, and certainly with the amount of support domestically it would have for a war like that. And I wanted to get to this with you, because you do know this much better than anyone. The resistance in the Middle East is now pan-Arab, and it's armed, and it's coordinated. It's been going on for 20 years, right? But now we see it sort of flowering, if you can allow me that term, across the region. And as I understand it, the resistance, right, the Iraqi militias, some of them aligned with Iran, some not, the Houthis, et cetera, Hamas, Hezbollah, right, parts of the Syrian political scene, all part of the resistance. They certainly are anti-Zionist. They want to eliminate Israel as an ethno-state, sure. But I believe they are primarily interested in kicking Uncle Sam out of the Middle East. And that's been their project since the Iraq War. Did I get that right? What do you know about these various groups and their ideologies and their motivations? And every time I mention the Houthis, I have 25 idiots on Twitter yelling at me how they enslave women and have brought slavery back, and I have no business saying anything good about them. But if they want to end the empire that I also want to end, then I would like to say something favorable about that. But this seems like a vast resistance that the United States and Israel combined have no chance of defeating. The
U.S. is struggling to penetrate the naval blockade of the Ansar Allah Houthis, who are effectively in control of most of one of the poorest countries in the world. I mean, that's just to tell you everything you need to know about the weakness of U.S. naval power. They waged some horrific strikes in Sana'a that killed a lot of civilians about 2 weeks ago. But I interviewed this spokesman, the English language spokesman for the Houthi movement, Mohammed al-Bukhaiti, and I asked him a lot of questions about what motivates them, and he gave me clear answers. And he's an interesting person because he had actually spent time in Denmark as a younger man and was involved in Socialist Party organizing there and helped lead various Palestine committee-related events for Denmark's Socialist Party and various anti-war groups. And so he's someone who's familiar with the West. What he said was, we don't hate Western people, we don't hate Americans, we're actually trying to reach out to you to and asking you to help us lift ourselves out from under this boot that caused the worst humanitarian crisis in the world prior to October 7th with the US, Saudi, British, Qatari, Emirati siege of our country, which they defeated. And their defeat of that siege and their intervention in Gaza is nothing short of heroic. They're doing what the rest of the world should be doing with Gaza and what the sold out or cooed out countries like Pakistan, which are nuclear armed, refuse to do. This is the perfect case for the responsibility to protect or military intervention. And the Houthis, and they're doing it on behalf of pressure, they're answering pressure from the entire Arab world. They're doing it on behalf of Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims. I mean, they're Zaydi Muslims. They're like an offshoot of Shia Islam, but they're doing it for all the Arabs who cannot do anything in Jordan, in Egypt, in the United Arab Emirates, who are under the control of these US-backed dictatorships. And they're more popular than ever. Hezbollah, same thing. They're more popular than they have been at any time since 2006 when they gave Israel a bloody nose. And now you actually see Sunni groups inside Lebanon announce that they're going to participate in the fight. Do you want me to lay out the various groups? I mean, and that was the question, but I'm just kind of...
Michael wants to jump in. We'll come back to this.
On Yemen, and I know people are going to accuse me of having Trump derangement syndrome, but if we're talking about the future of the American empire, then the three-time Republican nominee and likely future president is unfortunately a relevant factor that we have to discuss. So on Yemen, do people know, or do they forget, did they ever know in the first place that in 2019, Trump vetoed a resolution that would have required him or called upon him to eliminate the U.S. funding of the Saudi bombardment of Yemen that was going on in that earlier phase of the perpetual conflict there. And that was, celebrated as some kind of America First success because he had just brokered with Jared Kushner this massive arms deal to Saudi Arabia that, oh, by the way, Jared cashed out on when he left office and got billions from the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And we're told that Jared is just going to be on the outside for the next administration. Okay, I'm sure that's the case. We could all be very confident that he's going to be, have a firewall between him and the White House. So, okay, go ahead with your MAGA hat on and cast your vote if you want for that. And then Mike Pompeo hopefully can, assist maybe, but, a little bit down on the down low. So that's another area where, I'm sorry, if you're going to argue that Trump created this permission structure for the benighted, beleaguered right-wingers to finally realize that maybe there are some problems with American empire, how? What did he actually do that enabled that, other than blurting out a line here and there? Yeah, I remember the Jeb Bush debate in 2016 where he said that Bush lied the country into the war. Okay, fine. Maybe that was because he happened to be campaigning against the brother of George W. Bush rather than some deeply principled aversion to the war, because when Trump drone struck Soleimani, I guess in a very anti-war way, in January of 2020, the Iraqi parliament got together and passed an emergency resolution demanding that the U.S. forthwith withdraw our troops from Iraq. And that would have been a golden opportunity to actually do so if you wanted to. And what did Trump do? He refused, because Trump does not really strike me, and never has, as somebody who's really eager to diminish his own power. I think Trump is kind of a fan of American imperial hegemony because he gets to be the one who runs it. So, I don't know. He expanded NATO twice. People don't care or know. He brags to this day about how he got European NATO member states to spend more money on the collective alliance than Bush or Obama. And so here's where I don't buy the permission structure argument anymore. I think it's a hoodwink. I think people who think that they have these grievances against the American state or empire or what have you, then find themselves in this position where they've polarized behind Trump, and so they bend over backwards to justify virtually anything he does because they think that he has this 165-dimensional chess plan to finally rescind or roll back the American state, but there's really not a whole lot of good evidence for it, okay? So even just a few weeks ago, Trump was posting an endorsement of his commitment to NATO by Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General. Again, I don't know how much more evidence is required to countervail this thesis. It seems like it's unfalsifiable. It really is like a dogma, and that's the problem. When you dogmatize Trump and hold him up as this persecuted martyr figure, and yeah, I agree that the legal tactics being employed against him have lots of problems, but now he has this mythos where anything he does is going to be, interpreted or rationalized as somehow following along with this thesis. By the way, it's not even true that Trump created the permission structure. In 1999, a majority of House Republicans, by a fair amount, voted against authorizing Bill Clinton to conduct the aerial bombardment campaign in Serbia. Okay? So this goes back and forth, mostly aligned, sadly, with partisanship, because when Trump vetoed that war powers resolution in 2019 because he wanted to keep funding and arming Saudi Arabia, again, another anti-interventionist move, I guess, the vast majority of Republicans, including self-declared MAGA Republicans, were all in favor of it. And yeah, Democrats were against it, and then they flip when Biden gets back in. This just goes back and forth interminably. So I think if people can't even develop a rational understanding of Donald Trump, then I have doubts as to whether they can develop a rational understanding about the future of the American imperial project.
Uh-oh. So here's
Michael, why do you love Biden?
Who's
Because we both love the same flavor of soft serve ice cream.
Let me
served some up in Normandy.
Let me respond to that calumny from Michael Tracey about my intelligence.
Just admit I'm right. Just admit I'm right. Get it over with.
Should
I get out of the way?
Yeah, you should. No, actually, you undersold how bad Trump has been, Tracey. Not only did he allow the massive expansion of NATO, look at a map of NATO now, it's gotten bigger under Trump, he also didn't close, as far as I know, a single military base in the world. I think there's 500 plus still, maybe more. Not one. That's the very first thing you're going to do if you're any kind of anti-imperialist. killed Soleimani, which of course did nothing but get us closer to war.
And just very
with
quickly,
Iran.
he set the stage for the emergence of this new AUKUS alliance, which is Australia, UK, the United States,
goes on
which
and
is
on.
meant to be arrayed against China, and then Biden formalized it. So
The military budget went up under Trump too.
he
I'm not
appointed
sure who
three.
you're talking
He appointed
to. Wait.
yeah.
So hold on. But what you're not understanding, Mr. Tracey, is that we live in a postmodern age in which, and I thought you knew this, it matters much more.
Who's got the joint?
It matters much more, and we all know this, right? It matters much more what you say than what you do, right? So
That's where we differ.
hang on. Okay, but you are not an American in that you are knowledgeable about politics, right? How many Americans know anything we're talking about? Anything you just said about Trump's policies, how many Americans know any piece of that?
Well, you know who does know? Putin. At the same,
Wait a minute.
Hold on,
Wait a
very
minute.
quickly. At the same prep briefing, you might have seen this, Max. What did Putin say? He was asked, does he have a preference between Biden and Trump? He said he literally does not care. That's an exact quote because there's going to be total continuity regardless of who wins.
Let me just finish it. So yes, in terms of actual policy, I mean, he gets like a D- at best, for sure. Maybe an F. I've never denied that. I'm just the one who made your argument for you. What I've been saying, though, but rhetorically, the rhetoric is actually what disseminates. It's actually what Americans do hear, maybe in a sort of very tenuous way, but they do hear something about it. And when he stood up in the South Carolina primary Republican debate in 2015 and denounced the Iraq War and talked about NATO being a bad idea.
That was 8 years ago.
And got massive applause from military veterans in South Carolina, right, in 2015. That's continued, and I've followed MAGA ever since. There is still a major faction of MAGA that wants the United States out of the world. They're actual America First people. They really are. Now, I know a lot of the leadership is not. Bannon, Posobiec, these jackasses, no. But a lot of the grassroots of MAGA really wants the United States to come home.
Yeah, Ron Paul won all those bases, all those areas with bases in the South Carolina primary in 2004.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so the rhetoric, I think, did mean a lot. I think it did change American politics a lot. And again, it did allow a lot of people to feel comfortable calling into question the empire. Before Trump, you guys are old enough, I assume. You remember past presidents, right, and past senators, how they talked about American foreign policy? Was there a lick of difference between them? Whether they were Democrat, Republican, they spoke in exactly the same way about the military bases, about NATO, about Israel, about all of it, until 2015 and 16 with Trump. That's all. Otherwise, no, he's ridiculous and horrible and should be tossed out, and it does nothing to save anybody from in the world. But again, he did open the door. That's all I'm saying. Now, I want to get back to, go ahead, but say what you want to say, but I also want to get back to the resistance and who is it and how powerful are they? Are they actually going to drive the U.S. out of the world?
Well, this is all about, like, what is America first now? So, I agree. And you wrote your column contains a powerful argument that Donald Trump has abandoned the America First as it was originally branded by Trump. I think when Trump came in that debate in 2015, he was drawing a lot more through advisors on the ideas that have been put forward by Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul and other figures who had really set the stage for America First to be mainstream from within the Republican Party. And it was at a period of just enormous anger at the establishment. That was Donald Trump's closing argument crafted by Steve Bannon, that Hillary represents the establishment. We're not that, so give the establishment the finger. What do you have to lose? And in South Carolina, you had people there who suffered the moral injury of the war in Iraq in a way that people in the blue cities had not, except maybe like Chicanos in LA. If you want to wonder why a lot of Latinos aren't voting for like these establishment candidates. And Trump spoke to that. But now we're in a different time. And America First means something different to Donald Trump. As Michael pointed out in his piece, Lindsey Graham stood before the Senate and tried to rebrand America First as a kind of imperial ideology that's simply about American primacy. But there's something that goes beyond ideology here, or below ideology, that I think we need to acknowledge, which is that there is a material basis for the kind of America First brand that Donald Trump was advancing when he opposed a cessation of hostilities in Yemen, and as he now works to shepherd through, or after he worked to shepherd through the $95 billion supplemental for Ukraine and Israel, but primarily Ukraine. It's the material basis is the military industry in the U.S. And Trump promised to bring American jobs back. And this country doesn't run on Dunkin', although we have enormous amounts of childhood diabetes. This country runs on what you could, no offense to John Maynard Keynes, call military Keynesianism, or what I call the necroeconomy. The Wall Street Journal in, I think it was March or April, as this supplemental was being pushed forward, reported that foreign direct investment in the United States had increased 50% since the Ukraine proxy war began as a at least indirect result of U.S. military aid to Ukraine. And that over 65% of the 63 billion or so that would be technically sent to Ukraine as military aid was going straight back to the big five arms manufacturers in the U.S. who are going to set up plants, new production plants in swing states like Pennsylvania and Arizona, and that's what Biden is referring to when he calls it, when he echoes FDR about the arsenal of democracy. So war is very good for the American middle class, especially when some Slavic people who are like some old Slavic men and children are getting blown up after being hauled off into vans. We don't care about them. This is good for, people in suburban Phoenix. And those are swing states. Trump understands that too. He wants those jobs too, because those are people whose votes he's vying for. He has to keep the Saudis on his side. The sword dance with the Saudis, from a certain America First perspective, it was very wise, because look at how the Saudis NBS has treated Biden. They're closing the tap at Aramco. They're jacking up oil prices to screw Biden over. They don't want him in there because Tony Blinken has talked about human rights and some of the naughty things that the Saudis are doing. They want the sword dance again, and that will actually be good for the American consumer from a Trumpist perspective. So I think there's a material basis for America First that's just about doing whatever it takes to power the U.S. economy, and that's going to be fueled by raw American power abroad, imperialism, proxy wars, Israel, whatever it takes. And I think that abandons the principles of Buchanan and Ron Paul and some of the few remaining libertarians that are still
that's an
anti-war.
An interesting contradiction that the right has to work out. Right.
But that just shows you how nebulous and I guess fundamentally meaningless the whole moniker of America First really is. If it's that boundless that you can situate virtually anything that you want to do in it, if you could justify it ultimately as bolstering the American economy, then what does it mean? Obviously, it's just a branding exercise, as evidenced by Lindsey Graham, you rightly mentioned, going on the floor of the Senate, having this this big placard out where he's saying America First means supporting Israel and supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, correct. And why does Lindsey Graham? He seems like a clown. He seems like
he's very shrewd.
A Hitlerian figure. He loves the blood of Palestinian children. It gives him libidinal satisfaction, it seems, to see children beheaded. He just wins by 50 points every time, and all these
because Trump endorsed them.
Moron Democrats are sending money that they get like an email pitch for Jamie Harrison, and they're giving him money. He's going to get slaughtered. Lindsey Graham, because people know Lindsey Graham's going to bring those military-related jobs back home. What all Americans want right now, this is what the whole election is going to be decided on, is who can lower interest rates and inflation at the same time. That's all it's about. They don't care about the shit we're talking about.
Well, if you want to go back to the 2016 election, I don't know why people can't update their priors for new information. Like, we're still in this 2016 time loop indefinitely, it seems. But if you recall, Trump and Graham were at loggerheads in that race. They had this running feud. Trump actually went on stage at one point, I think it was in July of 2015, and read out Lindsey Graham's phone number, just so he would have his phone screwed up. And they actually did at least gesture toward having significant ideological differences. But guess what? That's gone. That's fully merged. Don't take my word for it. Ask Lindsey Graham. And ask Trump.
There's another aspect to this, which is also that Trump, and one of the values of having Trump served in the Trump era, which I was grateful for, was that Americans started to understand that the president isn't the guy in charge who makes all the decisions, and that there's this thing that they call the deep state, the national security state, whatever you want to call it. There are these faceless, bloodless figures lurking, soulless, who decided to shiv Trump because he was going to accidentally force peace on Ukraine because he just wanted some dirt on his political opponents. So Trump wasn't actually being an anti-imperialist. He was just kind of accidentally, erratically screwing up this
Rudy Giuliani was like, Donald, I got something for
program. Yeah, he was like pulling the bottom out from the most important project that the neocons had been working on since, I guess, 2005, which was to have a war or a proxy war with Russia, almost by accident. So I forgot where I was going there.
So a couple weeks ago, there was
Lindsey Graham represents that, and the point I wanted to make is after Trump's felony conviction, he is going to be more dependent on and beholden to what is referred to as the deep state than ever before.
And the donor class.
He needs powerful allies in the donor class. Miriam Adelson. It's no coincidence. Sorry? Yeah, thank you. We just
100 million.
Great minds who spend like 24/7 around each other for the last 10 years think alike. But yeah, Miriam Adelson, Likud heiress, basically widow of Sheldon Adelson, Likud party, Israeli cutout, has just pledged $100 million or $1 billion. Is it billion?
It's $100 million minimum.
$100 million minimum to Trump through a super PAC. And this promise or pledge came after Trump's conviction. So it's like...
No, it was before. It was before.
It was just before? All right, well, whatever. Israel has him by the short and curlies.
It came in conjunction with Trump having his little reconciliation dance with Nikki Haley, saying that Nikki Haley is going to be on the, quote, team. Nikki Haley making a pronouncement that she's voting for Trump and endorsing Trump at the Hudson Institute. And then Nikki Haley went straight from her announcement of endorsing Trump on a private jet ride to Israel, where she was going around touring and whatever, meeting with Netanyahu and then acting as an emissary, apparently, for Trump. Because it was reported, like, from her Newsmax lackeys who have like a Jerusalem bureau or something, that she's going to be briefing Trump on the trip. A couple weeks ago, there was a hearing in the House of Representatives with Tony Blinken, the Frenchman, and he was being upbraided by this congresswoman that probably nobody's ever heard of, but she's one of the more powerful people in the House Republican Conference, Representative Ann Wagner of Missouri. Okay, no name, who cares, right? But she made a very telling argument. You saw this? She said that she was derogating Blinken for not signing off on commercial arms sales to Israel quickly enough. Now that's different than the supplemental funding bill, which is basically just a grant of money, of weapons to Israel. This is where Israel has a separate mechanism for acquiring U.S. weaponry that will actually, allegedly pay for it under some authority. And Ann Wagner was saying that the Biden administration is abandoning Israel, betraying Israel by not having these weapons flow to Israel quickly enough through this arms sale mechanism because Boeing has a giant plant in her district in Missouri. And she was actually saying, I could pull up the quote, that people in the St. Louis metropolitan area can't pay their mortgages or their child care or their car payments because Tony Blinken's State Department is not ratifying these arms sales quickly enough. And Ann Wagner, she jumped aboard the Trump train as soon as was politically practical, and she said that the reason that she's supporting Trump is because Trump will restore, quote, deterrence and be a more strong, dependable ally for our partners around the world, meaning recipients of arms deals, okay? So, the Israel thing is actually pretty important with Trump because obviously Biden is more backed by the liberal secular Jewish contingent, which is probably somewhat on the downswing within the Democratic Party. But Trump, I mean, when I was in Israel a couple months ago, Jeremy was there, I would talk to people who are aligned with the most extreme religious parties in Israel. When we talk about religious, we're not talking about, you have a Seder dinner, every couple months. Okay, no, these are the hardcore messianic, actually, religious people in Israel who have increasing levels of political power, as evidenced by these, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich types. And they love Trump more than they probably love their own son. They would probably behead their baby on an altar of America First if it meant that, Trump would smile at them. Okay? And there's actually a contingent of people in Israel who are literally plotting, and these are the most extreme segments that probably Netanyahu wouldn't even have been associated with not long ago, who are literally plotting to rebuild the Third Temple, meaning destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque and build the Third Temple because we're coming to the end of the Jewish calendar in like 150 years or something. And they think that Trump is basically a King David or King, literally, you can go to Israel and get a commemorative shekel with the visage of the biblical King Cyrus transposed onto Trump. No, I wish I'm going to go back just to get it. Trump is running explicitly on re-empowering the most ardent elements of what we're saying is this critical proxy of the United States empire, right? Am I wrong? Tell me where I'm wrong. He actually is going around now to his many donor confabs because talk about 2016. He gave up on self-funding once he got the nomination. So that was, there's also a rewriting of history where, Sheldon Adelson also gave tens of millions to his campaign in 2016, and then he delivered by moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And he was at the Republican Jewish Coalition Gala last October and said, hey, Miriam, your late husband, who we all loved and was the greatest guy, he's really resting in peace now because we gave him his life's achievement of seeing to it that the embassy was moved to Jerusalem. So anyway, it's not like there's some massive shift, but yeah, I lost my train of thought. But you see where I'm going.
So we've got 25 minutes left, and we're gonna talk a little bit more, but I want to open it up for questions right after that. And if you have any questions, come up to the front here, and I'll give you my mic. Okay. So I just wanted to say, you mentioned St. Louis. And I was looking at where Boeing makes the bombs, the 2,000-pound bombs that have been dropped on cities full of children. I believe they're made in St. Louis, either there or in Virginia.
Yeah, it's
that
a Boeing
lady
factory.
was like,
St. Charles, Missouri.
we need to send the JDAMs or people in St. Louis will not be able to pay for daycare.
Right.
We
She
need to
said
blow up daycare facilities in Gaza to pay for ours. That's literally
pays
what she
well.
said.
Very quickly, what I was going to say, and then you go to questions, is that...
Okay, here goes the next 25 minutes.
No, it's going to be 30 seconds, okay? What Trump is doing when he's going around to these donor confabs is he's saying he's now a very diligent student of Jewish history. So he's studying the Holocaust, and he's saying that he's very troubled because he's now seeing a new surge. Unknown people are denying October 7th to him. And he's saying we have to be very careful about that because it means that there's going to be another tidal wave of Holocaust denial, and that's why you got to vote Republican in November.
We're going to have to delete that fist pump from the video.
That's the new Holocaust
I can
denial,
just see
is to question the official version of October
Brianna
7th.
Wu is going to have a great time with that. But
Brianna Gray will.
Wu.
R.I.P.
The good Brianna is down
Isn't
with
it
me.
Brianna Wu?
The real Brianna. And
Is that her name? Yeah.
The other one is like genocidal Rachel
Right.
Dolezal.
Is Brianna Wu coming to Icarus Fest?
Oh, no, she
If
couldn't make
Wu-
it this year.
I got community noted for saying Brianna Wu was a tacit racial imposter.
Right.
Okay, take those giant sunglasses off on your avatar and all your bio photos, and then and prove who you are.
Okay.
I don't even know.
Stop trying to create. Stop trying to obfuscate.
So this brings me, I guess, to my last question.
Anyway.
So yeah, let me.
My name is Michael Wu.
So here's one of the problems. Maybe it's the biggest problem with being sort of.
That's why Anya kept her name, because we don't want anyone thinking she's Jewish.
Oh, you don't want to spread that around. The problem is with being an opponent. I was going to say not just of the empire, but of U.S. foreign policy in general. Is you automatically get accused of being on the side of the other guys, right? Of the enemies. And now, recently, Wyatt Reed, who I think is an awesome journalist, like everybody at the Gray Zone, And I knew this. I knew he worked
Please clap.
as a stringer. Yeah. He is. They're all awesome.
Jeb Bush.
I knew this all along, and I mean, I know you guys had worked for RT. I've been on RT. I took a show of hands last year for the panel that was here for everybody who'd been on RT, and everybody raised their hands, so who cares? That he had worked for Press TV, which is an Iranian state media outlet, before working for the Gray Zone. And that's the only place you could go if you were going to say such things about U.S. foreign policy. When I was going on RT about 10 years ago, that was the reason they brought me on, and I couldn't go on CNN or MSNBC and say these things about the United States, so that's fine. But now, so of course, it comes out, or they now found out, the opponents of the Gray Zone, the supporters of genocide, the opponents of ceasefire, and of course, this has been all the talk on Twitter for a few days about how you really are run by Iran, you work for Iran, after, I guess, having worked for Putin. Does it
At the
pay
same
well?
time.
Oh, is that what? Okay, yeah.
That was the first line of the article.
Right. Oh, it wasn't? Okay, yeah. So, you want to just respond? We should just deal with this right now before we go to questions.
Well, for the millionth time, it's false. Iran and Russia, the Iranian and Russian government do not support the Gray Zone in any way. We have no relationship with them financially. We don't have a political relationship with them. I don't really know any officials on a very intimate basis. So there's really no basis for accusing the Gray Zone itself as an institution or an entity. And basically what happened is the Washington Post ran a full-page article, like in their print edition. Like if you opened it up and you're just some woman in Bethesda who likes to read the Washington Post for like local news and who won the Nationals game, and then all of a sudden you open up and it's this bizarre article that it's just impossible to understand, which is the point, that is trying to make a supposedly fringe publication that deserves this much ink appear to be one of the most dangerous Iranian and Russian weapons inside the United States. And it's really difficult to unpack. And the point of that was to get other people who are less scrupulous and more invidious to then directly accuse us of being sponsored and controlled by Iran in order to finesse some kind of federal investigation. Maybe like the House GOP calls me in or something, like, pro-Hamas media as a Iranian weapon, and I have to answer questions about something that doesn't exist. But that was the point of it, which shows you how just completely evil the Washington Post is. Every source in that article, every single one, was funded and controlled by the U.S. government, the Atlantic Council, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, the one guy who claimed credit for getting these supposedly hacked documents that showed that Wyatt had worked for Press TV, supposedly. Neil Rauhauser is a longtime FBI informant, according to emails and many people who have known him. So the whole thing was just a three-letter agency hit on the Gray Zone because they can't stop us through other means, and we're doing so much damage to them. And I'll talk about that in a second. But the only thing that they have in it that was solid was that Wyatt had, as he was starting out his journalistic career in his 20s and was covering like BLM protests on the front line, was producing some segments and appearing on Press TV. And he was doing it publicly and tweeting like, here's me on Press TV. So what do we need hacked documents for to tell us that Wyatt did stuff for them? And I don't actually know whether I can't confirm whether he was paid or whatever, but if he was, it was like chump change. So why does this merit an entire page in the Washington Post? Because the Gray Zone, as I said, the Gray Zone is doing damage to them, and legacy media, is collapsing. And specifically, we've done damage to the official narrative around October 7th. This is acknowledged in that article. They say, Israelis say, this is the actual language in the Washington Post article, Israelis say that the Gray Zone has falsely claimed that Israel killed its own citizens on October 7th. Well, guess what else Israelis say? That Israel killed its own citizens on October 7th. The top publications in Israel, Yediot Aharonot, Ynet, Israel attacked 70 vehicles in a mass Hannibal event, deploying the Hannibal Directive, which It allows Israel to attack its own citizens if they're taken captive by Palestinian militants to deprive those Palestinian factions of political leverage. Attacked over 70 vehicles on October 7th with Apache helicopters. Many Israelis were killed. The order was free fire. All firing regulations were off the table. Just go crazy. Haaretz, which has published 7 attacks on us this year. 7 attacks. I assume it's like, I assume there's Israeli intelligence involvement somehow, but they're obsessed with us. Published an article on how General Barak Hiram, one of the top generals in Israel, specifically ordered a tank to shell a home in Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th that was filled with Israeli Jewish captives, including 2 twin children, and killed 13 people in order to kill their captors, who are Hamas militants, rather than negotiate an end to the standoff. And this guy is hailed as a hero in Israel. He also ordered the Israeli forces in Gaza to blow up Isra University for no reason at all, had no connection to Hamas. But these are the facts. And the Washington Post is spreading misinformation to accuse us of misinformation and running and serving as a conduit for governments and intelligence agencies, including presumably foreign intelligence agencies like Israel's, in order to falsely accuse us of being a conduit for foreign intelligence and foreign governments. And therefore, we should all be deeply satisfied and happy at the beautiful sight of the Washington Post collapsing and failing and losing 50% of its readership. I look forward to urinating on the ashes of the Washington Post building when it finally collapses. And if anyone from the Washington Post is watching right now, and you lose your job, I hear Press TV might be hiring.
Don't go onto any college campuses because, Max, I'm really recommending that you don't go onto any college campuses because you'll be accused of endangering the Jewish students just by your mere presence and probably of violating the Civil Rights Act of 1965.
Well, they're a protected class.
All right. Any questions? Anyway, awesome. Come on up here.
So, from Thad to Michael, I just want to know, what do you guys think of?
I feel like I'm facing an accuser the way this is set up.
This is an accusation. Should I face that way? But what do you guys make out
blocking
of
the camera?
The widow, Adelson's widow, the interview where Trump said that the war should end or something, I'm paraphrasing. Please, Michael, go last, because he's going to stomp on all of our hope. And he might be right, too.
That should make me want to...
I
relish stomping on your hope. That's why I'm here.
I know, but that's why, last. And then the other thing I just want to say is, as a anti-war polemic, I just really adored Trump's 4 years. It was the first 4 years without a new war. And my right-wing... that's why you're... And my right-wing family is now talking about Gaza being too much. Once again, please let us, Michael.
You have to go last, Michael.
Yeah, I'll go last. I'll comply. I'll comply with your directive.
We'll try to be quick to get as many questions in as possible. But Donald Trump had to give an interview to 2 journalists from Israel Hayom, which is a right-wing paper or pro-Likud, pro-Netanyahu paper in Israel that has historically been owned by the Adelson family.
Still is.
And still is. I think, yeah, it is. That's what he had to do to run for president, and he had to basically prostrate himself before these journalists, which tells you a lot about American politics. But you can tell that I don't think his heart is in it. But he's just going to do whatever it takes to court Israel in the most extreme way possible because he thinks that's the way to win. I think he might even be coming at it from like an anti-Semitic perspective, like you got to have the Jews. You need the Jews. You can't go against the Jews if you want to win in America. My dad taught me that.
That's pro-Semitic.
Sure. I mean, yeah, we've done great in this country. There is no anti-Semitism in America, not in an institutional sense. The anti-Semitism is spread by Zionists who want to destroy Jewish life and force all of us to move to the crappy little apartheid state 5,000 miles away. But that's a side point. I don't think Trump's into it. I don't know where Biden's mind is at, but he is clearly under the control of the Adelson family. There are other major Trump donors who we don't hear much about, like Ira Perlmutter, who is an Israeli American, has the same agenda as Adelson.
Steve
Schwarzman. I would say, Bill Ackman's now announced his support for Trump. So there's no reason to think that Trump would be any less genocidal than Biden. What we can also assume, though, is Trump will be a much poorer salesman for Israel's wars, and that if Trump were president now, there would be resistance. I mean, I could see like Hakeem Jeffries getting up and crying out for the children of Gaza just to embarrass Trump. Chuck Schumer, what he did to attack Netanyahu would have been directed at the U.S. president as well for arming Netanyahu if Trump were president. They only care about partisanship.
Yeah, so allow me to joyfully stomp on your hope. So I mean, first of all, I think you're misreading Trump's very garbled, incoherent statement of position to the extent that a position on Gaza can be pried out of him. He's been consistent. He says that Israel needs to pulverize Gaza more quickly, and also they need to stop the unfortunate images of the destruction from being shown on television because he says it looks terrible. So that's Trump's position. When he says he wants the war to stop, he wants Israel to eradicate Gaza quicker. So that's the actual position. And he's made no bones about it. So I don't know how many more ardently pro-Israel donors he has to go, suck up to for that point to be hammered home. And also just look at the record from the 4 years that he was in power. I mean, he brags about it. He recognized the annexation of the Golan Heights. He spearheaded this whole, majestic Abraham Accords, which is basically just buying off the corrupt Gulf state potentates in exchange for a future potential recognition of Israel, which means actually entangling the U.S. even further in the Middle East by potentially even ultimately giving Saudi Arabia a full-fledged U.S. security guarantee, which means that the U.S. will in some sense be obliged to come to the military defense of Saudi Arabia even more than it already is. So, the Adelson thing, again, that's just a continuation of this is just the third cycle when Trump's been funded by Adelson, or now his, who's now dearly departed, unfortunately, actually buried in the Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem, which is, obviously another annexation of Israel's. That's where they flew him from his deathbed in Malibu to be buried. And I guess one of his dying wishes...
You can't ascend to heaven without... When the Moshiach comes back, you cannot ascend to heaven without being buried there.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, Trump was the one who put out like a little order in conjunction with his lackey MAGA Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, to basically call for the dispersal of the college protests that were happening a month or so ago. So I don't know where... Look, if you want to support Trump on some whatever ground because you think he's going to, be a bulwark against whatever, that's fine. Well, that guy said that he loved Trump's first term and his right. So all I ask is just be rational and fact-based about what Trump has actually done, and then if you want to make an argument go from there, fine. But let's not deal in this fantasy realm of Trump.
I just said that his first term was the first time in my political lifetime where there wasn't a new war. The first 4
No, we're going to get into this one.
Let's not go down that road.
Let's get more questions in.
Yeah, Anya can't escape from her seat, so I'm going to try to... there you go, thank you.
Everyone can hear us.
No, we're good. I didn't know we had that. Thank you.
Everyone can hear me? So I just wanted to say in front of everyone that Michael Tracey, you were right about RFK Jr. and introduce that chip to this conversation, because I feel like
that was a point of dispute last year at the Icarus.
A lot of people in this room probably feel the same way that I did, or felt the same way I did at one point, and Michael Tracey got to crush all of our hope there. So if the two of you could just talk about where RFK Jr. fits into this discussion and why someone who's willing to be so radical and alternative on 90% of his foreign policy issues falls apart when it comes to Israel and Zionism, which kind of undermines every other, how are you going to take on the neocons if you're going to be pro-Israel? It's kind of a ridiculous position to have. So
Never trust a Kennedy. This is what I said a year ago.
Wait, while you have the mic, Anya has a new book out.
Yes.
It's called, yes, please clap.
Yes.
It's called Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire. If you want to quickly just tell us about the book in like a few lines.
I think that's...
All right, buy the
people
book.
can look it up.
But I mean, it relates directly to our conversation about the end of U.S. empire. It's
We
not
didn't,
just
we didn't
about
get to Latin
Venezuela.
America, really, so unfortunately. Next time. Yes.
Maybe you'll get on a panel next time, but you have to be a white man, so. No.
I'll address that since you led with very flattering praise, which I deserve far more of, frankly. I was being told by people who I otherwise respect in a lot of instances that I should be really appreciative of RFK Jr.'s, quote, voice. Now, I guess to imitate that voice, I should pour some gravel down my throat, but leaving that aside, I don't want to do a low blow.
That was a low blow.
That's a low blow. I acknowledge that's a low blow, but I was being told I should appreciate his voice because he could read a Douglas McGregor Facebook post and then regurgitate it out on Ukraine, or listen to some dopey podcast, and that was supposed to be a very sophisticated view on Ukraine. I don't think he has a sophisticated view on particularly anything. He has a weird paranoia that's kind of all organized around his actually valorization of his family dynasty. I'm sorry, would anybody know or care who this guy is if he couldn't constantly invoke that his dad and uncle got shot 60 years ago? At a certain point, who cares? Get over it. That's not a qualification to run for president. Otherwise, he'd just be an environmental lawyer, an ambulance chaser. He would have no notoriety. He's a pure dynast. That's why people are drawn to him, because they hear the name Kennedy. That must mean he's the heir of Camelot. But now he's going against the deep state. And now he's going to give us the real down low on the JFK assassination or something. Give me a freaking break. On Israel, it shouldn't come as a surprise. When he had his little boon in the first 6 or 9 months of 2023, it's because everybody sat there entranced by his ass-kissing podcast appearances, where he would give Joe Rogan the scoop on some deeply hidden secret and do no research on his actual history. The guy was 70 years old when he decides to run for president. He'd been a loyal Democrat his entire life. I think he endorsed Hillary Clinton more times than Bill Clinton endorsed Hillary Clinton. And everything just got he just had a sudden epiphany at age 69 or 70, where now he's going to take down the deep state. Give me a break. If anything, he's an apologist for this messianic vision of the Kennedys, where they're spreading democracy and liberalism all over the world. Yes, through the barrel of a gun when necessary. So no, I never bought any of it. And so if it took you for him to be a huge zealot on Israel to realize that, it's just because you didn't really do enough research. No offense.
Well, I have to concede to being out-curmudgeoned here. I feel sort of deflated.
It's my specialty.
I'll try to make 2 points quickly, or 1 point quickly, somewhat in contradiction to what you're saying, and then give my take on why this happened with RFK. There were a lot of people who are supporting RFK Jr.'s candidacy who I think represent a really noble tradition that came out of the journalistic counterculture in the early years of alternative media. My friend David Talbot, Ed Curtin, who were crudely referred to as JFK conspiracy theorists, who understood, if you read The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot, it's one of the best books for understanding how the U.S. national security state operates, that there was a deep state that was likely involved, or was definitely involved, in the assassination of JFK because of what JFK said at American University in one of his last speeches, when he said, put yourself in the shoes of the Soviets, try to understand what it's like having Jupiter missiles pointed at you from Turkey. Let's end this Cold War before it turns into something horrible. We can go into the details, but I think that book and JFK and the Unspeakable are really important to read to understand the anti-war mystique around the Kennedys. And I think there's a lot to it. That I think JFK attempted to do a lot of noble things that led to his assassination.
Like running an assassination outfit through his brother Bobby that went after Castro obsessively. And, when Lyndon Johnson took over, he said, they're running a goddamn Murder, Inc. out of the CIA. Apparently, JFK was this big foe of the CIA, wanted to splinter it into 1,000 little pieces. That's what RFK Jr. always cites, a totally out of context quote to make the point about. But that was after JFK was micromanaging the Bay of Pigs invasion, a regime change invasion of Cuba, and it failed, and then he was mad at the CIA and wanted to put new personnel in.
Okay, thank you, Noam Chomsky. Loud Noam Chomsky.
He happens to be right about that.
Spelled Gnome, Chomsky. It was JFK who slipped a secret communique and a book, handed it to Pierre Salinger and sent it to Fidel Castro in order to initiate diplomacy over reducing tensions, possibly ending the embargo. Fidel Castro mourned the killing of JFK and had a much more nuanced view of JFK. Than that, JFK and Diem of South Vietnam enacted a plan to reduce U.S. trainers by 50%, and the CIA oversaw the assassination of Diem after instrumentalizing a kind of color revolution through the Buddhists who were backed by USAID in South Vietnam. There are all these details.
Who created USAID?
Yes.
Hint, it was John F. Kennedy.
Well,
and by the way,
surprise, he's not in charge
and by the way, the savior Bobby Kennedy, he had just authorized yet another attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro within days of John F. Kennedy getting assassinated. So I'm not saying I have all the answers to who killed JFK, but look, I think I would urge to think about it more in terms of blowback than some magical effort to stop JFK from eradicating the deep state after he just got done shepherding through the largest ever peacetime military mobilization since World War II. I mean, it makes no sense. We don't want to get sidetracked.
Right. I would love to have the JFK debate for the next hour. Oh, yeah. But I'm saying, in any case, all of those elements, those people that I know, have turned their backs on RFK Jr. And it all started with RFK Jr. at a dinner party in New York, declaring that he believed that the vaccine, that COVID itself was created in a lab, and that Ashkenazi Jews and Asians were immune to it, or something like that. So then he gets called anti-Semitic because a New York Post reporter leaks the audio of that. Shmuley comes in, walking anti-Semitic stereotype and dildo salesman, Rabbi Shmuley. And he starts accusing...
Michael Jackson's personal rabbi.
And he starts accusing RFK of being an anti-Semite who loves Hitler, gave Goebbels a rusty trombone or whatever, all of this stuff. And then RFK gets frightened, and he invites Shmuley to his house, because Shmuley's the classic race hustler. And Shmuley says, you know what, I'm going to make this all go away. All you have to do is just say whatever. We're going to feed you a script. We're going to do an event, and the Adelsons have all this money. And that's what the next thing you know, RFK's on stage with Shmuley saying, the Palestinian Authority has a pay-to-slay policy to kill Jews anywhere in the world. And, this lying about Palestinians. The Zionist Organization of America's director had become his handler, Morton Klein. Who pays Morton Klein? And, I debated Morton Klein once back in the day on RT, on Abby Martin's show, and I didn't know he had Tourette's, and so I got upset with him because I thought he was laughing when I was talking about all the children killed in Gaza. So that wasn't a great moment. But anyway.
By the way, the recipient of the 2022 Lifetime Achievement Award and the Theodore Herzl Prize from the Zionist Organization of America, can you guess who it was? The initials are DJT. So Phil,
Okay, well, I think you'd crush the Trump vote in this room by now. But the rest is sort of all I wanted to say. Shmuley, as clownish as he is, Morton Klein, they're vessels for Adelson money. Their whole salary, everything they do is on behalf of Adelson. Adelson pays for Netanyahu's whole network. So basically, Netanyahu's kind of controlling RFK through these figures. And RFK 2 months ago did an event to raise money, I think, for Shmuley's private security detail, which doesn't seem to exist because you can see him like riding up the West Side Highway on a bicycle with a green neon lycra suit on, with no security around him. And then he'll just start up a fight with like a 14-year-old Arab kid at an ice skating rink. I mean, it's insane. And so it's just a hustle for Shmuley. But who was on stage with RFK? World-renowned philanthropist Miriam Adelson. So yeah, he's basically been bought off.
But RFK Jr. was a hardcore pro-Israel zealot long before he started running for president in this cycle.
That might be true.
I mean, it's not like he had some sudden, incident where he went astray.
Do we have any other questions?
Oh, one more? Okay, last one. In the back. Yeah, go ahead. Before we do that, do you guys have any, we've talked about the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians killed and Russians killed, and of course the 15,000 dead children in Gaza and women. But I want to know, like, what are your concerns, and how do you want to address what Jewish students at Harvard are facing? Do you have any?
Oh, you mean
Michael,
the most beleaguered members of society, right?
We know that you're not Jewish because you earlier said Shabbat dinner, or what you say? Forget it. Passover dinner.
Did I misstate
Seder
that?
dinner
I
every other month.
Sorry, I meant Shabbat dinner.
Right. So you don't care about Jews, clearly, but what?
No, I deeply care.
What do you?
With every fiber of my being.
I've heard someone got poked in the eye. I don't know.
Yeah, what happened? What happened? I think anti-Zionist Jews are actually facing the most violence, but they're not Jews. So.
Most definitely. Yeah. All right, in the back.
Yep, right here. So first of all, Mr. Tracey, you are annoying in person just as much as on social media. But
thank you very much, sir.
No, I'm sure you would.
Kiss?
After the show, I'll buy you a drink after too. And I did also want to give a glowing review to Anya's book. I was reading sections of it. I got it at the Francis Kite Club, and everyone should buy a copy of it. It is very good. And I wanted to ask about Brianna Joy Gray getting fired from The Hill. This is a pattern that. Oh yeah, Brianna. Yeah, I'm sorry I broke the news to you. Brianna Joy Gray got fired from The Hill yesterday, and I got the news while I was at a fundraiser for my campaign. I'm running against Richie Torres. I had to throw that in there. And
is that Jose?
Yeah.
Is that Jose Vega?
Yeah. I'm everywhere. I'm sorry. And you don't know me?
Oh.
No.
I thought that was a legitimate question he was asking. I mean, the guy says he finds me annoying, so maybe, good luck in the campaign, sir. I'm sure they'll
I just
you
wanted
expect to lose by 60 or 70 or 80, like somewhere in that range?
I think he meant it as a compliment.
It was a compliment, you know?
Okay.
He annoys powerful people for
Yeah.
a living or something.
Okay, I take it back.
It's a little hard to make a living off it, but I just wanted to ask that, don't you think that the censorship and the firing of people who are leftists, especially like Katie Halpert, Brianna Joy Gray, we're seeing this pattern happening where there's this clear kind of like, okay, well, we know we're going to get blowback from firing these people, but then they go on to be independent. They're kind of creating careers for independent journalists already by doing that. So don't you think that this tactic is more out of desperation and the fact that the apparatus is falling apart and that independence is actually winning? So, yeah.
Amen.
Well, Brianna Joy Gray already had a pretty large independent platform of her own even before she was brought to the Hill, my understanding is. So I think, there might be something that's directionally true about what you're saying, which is that when somebody gets scurrilously fired, yeah, they probably get a lot of notoriety, and they can use that to marshal it to their own platform. I'm not sure. I think who owns the Hill? I forget. I was in that studio once, and it's very odd. Just a very quick point on the beleaguered Jewish students.
Nexstar.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, on the beleaguered Jewish students. When the night that the NYPD was sent in to raid Columbia, after Mike Johnson triumphantly strode onto the campus shortly before, Johnson convened a whole-of-house press conference, meeting every top Republican committee chair, et cetera, and they said that for the remainder of this legislative session, their number one priority is going to be fighting anti-Semitism on college campuses because the most beleaguered and downtrodden members of American society are literally Ivy League college students. And there are these big threats. I mean, the NYPD top chief the morning after the raids said that they finally brought out this big dystopian-looking machine to go into the library because it was the biggest public safety threat that New York City had faced in years. Meanwhile, they're frog marching out these frail little college girls as though they were gonna, assault people on the sidewalk or something. But on Brianna Joy Gray, I don't know what to make of that because clearly there was a concerted campaign to pressure her employer to terminate her, but I don't actually think I think you're right. It's not going to really diminish her influence because all publicity is good publicity, and it's not just somebody who sounds off willy-nilly. She's an intelligent person and she can make coherent arguments. So it's not like she was just she got caught making an anti-Semitic remark while she was drunk or something. She was in the midst of actually conducting what I thought was a very fair interview with the sister of a hostage in Israel, but they'll seize any opportunity they can to get a pound of flesh.
So she was fired for rolling her eyes when a sister of a hostage in Gaza said, I really think you should believe Israeli women, and it was just so condescending and manipulative that we were all raped, and it's not true. It's a hoax that they have deployed in order to manufacture consent for genocide, and all she did was kind of lightly roll her eyes. And I was thinking the only thing that she did wrong, as Michael pointed out too, was that she didn't roll her eyes harder and more visibly at this manipulative crisis actor. And I don't actually mean crisis. Don't get Sandy Hook people to sue.
Emotional blackmailer.
Don't raid the Gray Zone studios like they're doing to Alex Jones now. But which is another serious issue we should talk about. So she was fired. Nexstar has, they've hired a professional Israel lobbyist as their VP of communications. They're a very mainstream establishment organization. I think their whole angle with Rising was get a Bernie or anti-Democratic Party leftist and a Trumper or libertarian in order to weaken the Democratic Party. And it wound up making for some good TV, and we both got to go on sometimes. But their model is based on the actual model of independent media. It's fake alternative media or mainstream alternative media. And so who needs them? Also, and anyone who goes on that show now who actually is anti-war or against this genocide is a scab. No one's going to be. It's going to lose any reason to watch it after losing her. She was getting the most views. So, Robbie Suave, sorry, Suave. He's always been nice to me, so I'm not going to knock him. Nice guy. Anyway, the Washington Post is collapsing for the same reason. People just don't want to feel like they're being manipulated by establishment hacks, and they can see through it. At least people who are under 45. Just look at the numbers. Look at the polls on Israel-Palestine. There was a Jerusalem public, Jerusalem. What is it? It's actually I think an Adelson-backed think tank in Jerusalem. Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. It's a neocon group polled young Jews on the Israeli assault on Gaza. The majority of Jews under 45 want the U.S. to withhold arms to Israel until there's a ceasefire, and close to 40% believe Israel is committing genocide. So that's just among Jews, who are supposed to be the main group in support of this. It's over for establishment media. And just a quick point on the anti-Semitism on campus. My last point of this panel is these campus protests are very threatening, not just to Israel, not just to the Zionist billionaire class that is paying for all of these Elise Stefanik events and basically paying for these students to act as Israel lobbyists on campus. The demand of the student protesters on college campuses is to divest from financial arrangements and institutions that are involved in Israel's occupation of Palestine. But those are the arms companies and the R&D arm of the Pentagon that is essential to the future of American warfare which is contingent on the U.S. ability to compete with China in the AI realm and other high-tech areas. And so they are challenging R&D for the Pentagon at its core. Johns Hopkins University receives, I think, 4 times more from the Pentagon than it does from tuition. That's what American universities are, and they figured it out, and they're going after something that is very precious to the U.S. national security state. If they succeed, it will spread to other institutions. That's why Alex Karp, who is the CEO of Palantir, one of the major private spying firms in the world, which is doing targeting for the Ukrainians, is involved with Israel in doing targeting in Gaza, said at a conference of spooks in Washington, overseen by Eric Schmidt, the co-founder of Google, who oversees the third offset for the Pentagon and competing with China for AI dominance. Alex Karp declared, if these students succeed and we do not defeat them in the war of ideas, we will not be able to send armies to war in the West ever again. And he's right. And that's awesome. And they have already lost the war of ideas, which is why they're trying to get Wyatt Reed jailed, pulling Scott Ritter off planes, and just basically lifting the mask of liberal democracy to Assange out all of their internal critics and dissenters.
And making criticisms of the empire in Israel almost illegal. So if you want to catch Max, tell some jokes. He'll be doing some stand-up tonight.
I got an RFK bit.
He's got
I don't think I can outdo what Michael just did.
I've heard you.
I've offered to do a bit of my own if people are interested.
I've heard you have some new material. He has some new material to check out. And Michael will be heckling from the audience, so check that out later tonight with Jimmy Dore. It's very, very large crowd, so if you don't have tickets, get tickets now. And free Palestine. Thank you.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.